This is Mainly Watches, and I'm Nick. I've had a couple viewers reach out to me and ask me to do a segment all about watch spring bars. Not a very glamorous topic, I know, but if you guys are interested in it, I'm all for talking spring bars. You've probably guessed from the content in my past videos, I have a thing about spring bars. And indeed, I mean, they're like lug nuts on your car. They're the most underappreciated item, but yet they contribute so much to your safety. And much like the lug nuts on your car, if you have a lug nut fail, you're going to lose your wheel and you're probably going to get in an accident. Same thing with your watch. Those spring bars are absolutely critical to keeping your watch on your wrist, and they're often overlooked. So it's been one of my big pet peeves. I'm a bit of a spring bar freak, and I'm always changing them and putting high quality spring bars in. So let's talk about it. I'm not an expert. This might be difficult for me to film because spring bars are obviously very tiny things, and I don't know how well my camera is going to focus. I don't have a fancy high-tech studio here, so I'm just going to do my best, and hopefully we can capture this. So bear with me. I mentioned the lug nut analogy, which I think is pretty good as far as spring bars go. I mean, obviously, spring bar failure is going to lead to possible loss of your watch. I work in the marine industry, and I do a lot of accident investigations, and a lot of what I do is failure mode and effects analysis, where we look at what are the possible risks of things failing and what could cause a failure. And probably a lot of this ties into my craziness over spring bars. But, you know, obviously you want to look at how you mitigate the risk of losing your watch, and a lot of that comes down to the spring bars. The first step, at least in my brain, when I look at failure mode and risk analysis, is where are the weak points? And, you know, if we take, let's just take a watch on a bracelet here, okay? Obviously, you've got spring bars that could fail. In the case of a bracelet, you have screwed links. There are numerous pins in here. You've got pins here in the clasp. So in terms of the risk of failures, obviously a bracelet is going to be your highest risk. Any of these pins failing, spring bar failure, screw backing out, there are numerous points in here, probably more than a dozen, where you could have a failure point. So those are all things you want to look at. So yeah, bracelet, highest risk of a failure. Then, if we want to take the next step and we can look at a typical watch strap, two-piece strap, where are your failure points? Well, you've got your spring bars, of course, where you can have a failure, and you've also got your buckle. Don't forget, you have a spring bar holding that pin buckle in. So that's a failure point. So here you've got 1, 2, 3 failure points with the two-piece strap. Then we look at a NATO strap or a single pass strap. Here I've got an Erica's on a Doxa. Here your failure points, spring bars, so 2 failure points, and, well, very remote possibility with the strap. I mean, the strap could break or the stitching, but I would say this is a pretty low risk. And you can see these are a special type of spring bar, and we'll get into those in a bit. Then, finally, in terms of your risk, your safest with the least points of failure is going to be something like this, where you have fixed lugs. They're part of the watch case, and you have this on a fabric strap. You have no failure points. You know, the chance of failure here is very remote. So lowest risk of failure and highest risk of failure when you look at your watches. So having said all that good news, let's talk about spring bars. And you can see how I've got them organized. These are little beading cases, actually, and my wife got me turned on to these because she's into jewelry making and does beading, and they sell these things on Amazon. They're just cheap little plastic cups, but they're a great way to organize all your spring bars. So you can see what I've done. I've got them all in here. I've got them labeled by size, diameters, different types, some different tip diameters. So that just helps keep them organized. And then, yeah, I mean, they just kind of end up collecting. But you get the point. It's good to keep them organized. Don't just throw them all in a bucket and then try to pick through them. As far as your spring bars go, what I do, I keep a record of all my watches, and I have like a master list with all the serial numbers. But what I also include on there are things like the lug size, the thickness of the spring bars, the type of spring bars that are used, and very importantly are the pivot diameters. So that is the little pin right here. This is the actual part that makes contact with your watch. So that is really critical. Now, as far as spring bars go, I mean, the old analogy about size matters, well, with spring bars, size does matter. You've got to make sure you have the right size spring bar for your watch. And that's going to mean you know the correct length for your lugs. You're going to know the correct type of shoulders that the bar has. And you can see this one is a double flanged bar, so you've got the two flanges here. But, I mean, in the case of a watch with drilled lugs, like this Seiko drilled lugs, you don't need to use these double flange bars. You can just use a single shoulder or shoulderless bar because you can push them in and out from the lugs. So there is a point where you need to know. So I keep a record of my spring bars and the sizes. And, after a while, yeah, you start to know. And you have certain special ones, like I've got Seiko flangeless bars here. So these are the Seiko Fat Boy bars. And you can see it's just a double shoulder. There is no flange on here, but these are very stout bars. And likewise with the, we got here, Swiss non-flange. So some of the 22 millimeter watches where I have drilled lugs, again, these are a shoulderless bar, and you can see just big pivots on them. So important to know what type of bars you need on your watch, and then you can make sure you have the right ones. When we talk about the type of bars, when you buy a watch, if it's a brand new watch, there's a good chance the OEM manufacturer has used good quality bars, and you can take those spring bars out and use those measurements so you have a record of what the manufacturer has actually been using. Because it can be very difficult to try to get into your watch to measure that size of that tip. Now this is just a random spring bar I found lying loose in a drawer, so I thought I'd pull this out and show you. To me, this looks like just a cheap generic one, and this is kind of the fate of all my generic spring bars. So if I buy a cheap strap or something off Amazon, or if I get a secondhand strap and I don't know what the bars are, they get pulled out and thrown in this. Why I'm saving them, I don't know, because I'm not going to use them, but I'm saving them. A good micrometer, pair of calipers is a very good thing to have for sizing your bars. So in this one here, we can try to measure the tip diameter. I don't know if I can capture this on the camera. Yeah, we got it here. So this tip is coming in at 0.7 of a millimeter. 0.8 is your most common, of course. You can see the diameter of this bar is a 1.7. And if we measure the bar, we have 21.8. Now when I compress it, it's coming down to 18.5. I can tell this is a cheap spring bar because the amount of force that's needed to compress it is not very high. And this is where it's kind of important to look at the quality of your spring bars. And I'm just going to show you here, this is a really cheap rubber strap from Amazon, okay? This is probably a $10 or $15 strap. And I want you to look at these spring bars, okay? Let's, you can see it, get the camera to focus. There you can see the tips. They're not very long pivots, they're quite short. And if we measure it, I think this is a 19. Yeah, it's a 19 millimeter strap. But look at these pivots. If I go to compress it, it's so easy to compress. And this tells me this is a very low quality spring bar. For one, you can see it's kind of loose in here. But just the length of the pivots is very short, and it just doesn't feel like a quality spring bar. And why should it be? It's a cheap strap, so I wouldn't expect a high quality bar in here. Now let's take a more expensive strap. This is a high-end Hirsch strap, a Hirsch Tiger. See how the spring bar even popped out? Look at the difference in the pivots. Okay, this is also a quick release bar, but you'll notice much stronger pivots. If you compare the lengths, you've got a longer pivot length. And this is a much harder bar for me to compress. I mean, it hurts trying to compress this with my fingers. So, and here, of course, too, you can see it's very secure in the strap. So that tells me this is a high quality spring bar, and I wouldn't have to feel that I need to replace it and put a better bar in there. So generally speaking, you get what you pay for. If you buy a high quality strap, an aftermarket strap, you're not going to have to worry about that spring bar. Cheap straps, you want to worry. That reminds me, while I'm talking about straps and changing out your spring bars, here's something to remember. When you have a watch on a bracelet, this bracelet does take a lot of the stress off of that spring bar, and that allows some of the watches to get away with thinner spring bars. So even though 1.8 millimeter is the most common size, when a watch is on a bracelet and it's a properly supported spring bar in that bracelet, you might be able to get away with even a 1.5, or sometimes you'll even see a 1.3 millimeter bar in there. But the important thing to remember is this bracelet is taking all of that stress that's on that spring bar and distributing the stress over the whole spring bar. So it's not putting any kind of force that's going to want to blow that spring bar out. If you look at, let's just say, a fabric strap, an MN strap, or a NATO, if there is a force applied on that spring bar, most of that force is coming into the middle of the bar. So it's going to want to bow the bar, pull the bar out, and pull out the pins. So this is where it's very important to have strong spring bars in a watch when you use fabric straps. It's less so of a risk with a leather strap because, of course, you do get some support with the leather band. But I would say fabric straps are going to be your biggest risk point for putting stress on that middle of the spring bar. And that's where the size matters. So, you know, you can see, like here you have the Seiko Fat Boy bars. These are 2.5 millimeter bars, and they are stout. I mean, these are not gonna break. I mean, they're strong bars. And likewise, on this Doxa here, I've used these Swiss-made bars for Rolexes, and you can see they have a special shoulder design, and these are also on Synchrons. These are a 1.8 millimeter bar, but they allow you to get your fork in to compress the bar without really risk any damage to the watch case. So these are very nice bars. And, you know, there are so many different type of bars out there, and that's why I say it's so important to know what your watch is using and what size you want. So lug size, thickness, the type of the bar, does the watch have drilled lugs, and finally, very important is that pivot or pin diameter. Like this is a very small pivot diameter. I think we already measured it was 0.7. This Seiko has 1.1 millimeter holes. Now, this obviously doesn't fit this way, but just to show you, if I stick it into the lug hole, there's a lot of play. I mean, there's almost a half a millimeter of play. So you would not want to use a bar, even though this is like a 1.8 millimeter thick bar. This would be the wrong bar to use on this type of a watch because the pivots, the pins, are too small a diameter. And you can see the depth of these pins, how far these actually will engage into your watch case. I don't know if I can even show this on the camera. It's very hard to show. But yeah, you can see the actual pivot is very short on here. So that's why you really want to measure your watch, see what kind of case construction you have, and then select the appropriate spring bar. Now, in terms of quality, you'll notice I have a lot of these labeled Swiss, here Seiko, Esslinger, Swiss, another Esslinger, some generic ones. Oh, no, that's the generic. These are the special shouldered ones I was telling you about. Again, Swiss. So here's the thing with spring bars, okay? You don't really know what you're getting when you're buying them because none of them really have a maker's mark. There's no way to identify who made the spring bar. So the best advice is buy your spring bars from a reputable vendor. They're not marked with a maker's name, so unless you purchase from a reliable vendor, you don't know what you're getting. I can definitely say if you're going to go buy them in bulk from Amazon or AliExpress and you're getting them for like 5 cents a piece, you're probably getting some really cheap ass spring bars. And you know, some of these things are very low quality stainless. They will start to rust on you. Like I said, you don't know what the quality of the spring is inside. So like this bar, you can see it's very easy to compress. I hardly have to put any force on it to compress it. And yeah, I can tell this is just a cheap spring bar if I compare it to one of these higher quality ones. And I've harped on I like to buy the Swiss ones. Well, I do, because at least you can tell there is a big quality difference. If I take, well, here is a Swiss bar. This is a 1.8. Now, let's take a look at how this compresses. You'll see this is a much longer bar. This is 25 almost, 25 millimeters. But when I go to compress it, I'm really having to push hard. And this compressed down to 20. So this is a tough spring bar. And you can even tell sometimes with the quality of the stainless steel how the stainless looks. Good spring bars, they will set you back anywhere from $2 to $4 a piece, okay, for good spring bars. If you're getting them for 10 to 20 cents a piece, you're probably buying garbage. Do you want to trust your expensive watch to it? I don't know. Like I said, you don't know if they're actually made in Switzerland or Austria. They say they are. I can tell they're definitely higher quality bars, and that's why I say buy from a reputable vendor. A lot of the OEM watch parts, so for example, Marathon watch, I've bought spring bars from them. They say they're Swiss spring bars, and they charge you for it. But you can tell they're nice, high-quality bars. Other good sources I've found for spring bars, and I've mentioned them before, Auto Fry. Now, these are all watch supply warehouses, and I'm not affiliated with them. I'm not selling you guys anything, okay? But Auto Fry, it's ofrei.com, Auto Fry. They have a tremendous selection of spring bars where you can go and actually look at all the different pivot diameters, pivot lengths, types of bars, thickness of bars, and you can really order the proper bars. And they have a whole selection of good Swiss bars. Another one is Esslinger. They're also a watch supply. They have some real tremendous selection of spring bars, including some lower cost offerings too. From Europe, I've ordered from a company called Ernst Westphal. I believe they're out in Hamburg. They have, I'll put up a link to their website. They also go by watchparts24.de, but they have some very good German-made and Austrian spring bars. I think actually these might be made in Austria, I'm not sure. But like I said, you don't really know with spring bars unless you buy from a good vendor. But, you know, the moral of the story is here, don't take chances with your expensive watches on a 10-cent spring bar failing. You know what your spring bars are, know your sizes, and buy a good spring bar if it's an expensive watch that you don't want to lose. Yeah, if it's a cheap $50 watch and you're not going to lose any sleep over it, yeah, probably you're fine with the generic spring bars. I have had a spring bar failure just, you know, playing with a dog and doing some work outside. I've had spring bars fail. So I don't underestimate the importance of them. And finally, I will also just say, you know, keep in mind with these pin buckles, you do have a spring bar in here. So, I mean, this is probably an 18 millimeter spring bar on the clasp. And again, these can fail. So keep that in mind, your buckles. And likewise on your bracelets, you will have spring bars keeping things engaged. So check that. A final word here, if you have a bracelet with screws, you can use Loctite to set your screws in. You need to use the proper Loctite. This is the Loctite I use. It's the 222 thread locker. It's the low strength formula, so it's not going to set your screws in totally. So Loctite 222 for your screws on your bracelets, okay? That's what was recommended to me by a watchmaker, so that's what I've been using. Just quick wrist check here today. I have my Bow Endurance, and this is on an Artem Hydroflex strap. There's lots of different types. There's some curved ones. See, so much I can talk about. Curved spring bars, another neat option for watches with tight lug spacing. Bow in particular, they tend to have the lug holes very close to the case, so these can be very difficult watches to fit, and I've quite often, these 21s are actually for my Bow watches. So you've got curved spring bars. There's some different materials too. Here we have Mailchart, which is a nickel alloy. Not quite as hard as stainless steel, but very corrosion resistant. So there's a tremendous selection out there of spring bars. And moral of the story is size matters. Make sure you use the right size spring bars for your watch. And, you know, you can keep a selection of them like I do here. Get these little jewelry pots. I find this very helpful. But, you know, don't risk your watch on a cheap spring bar. So, anyhow, guys, I hope you found this interesting. As always, the video is not sponsored. I'm not paid, and I'm not affiliated with anyone. This is just for your interest. I'll put up some links in the description here to some of those watch suppliers or the watchmaker suppliers where I've been buying spring bars. I'm sure there are many, many others. Moral of the story is just go for quality. Buy some good spring bars and you won't have any disappointment. And check them frequently, okay? Anyway, thanks for watching. Think this video's gone on long enough. Hope you enjoy it. We'll see you next episode. Stay safe out there.